come once again to discuss things.
What do you want to do first?
Yeah, let's just go ahead and go through Mrs. Claus.
Okay, well, in that case, why don't you bring us in, Steve?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Steve, and joining me today is Ian.
Sid Part 2. Ian, yeah, that's
Yeah.
me.
Ian, thanks for being on the show.
Not a problem, Steve.
And thanks for editing it, and recording it, and putting it on your channel, and giving me the title, and the topic, and the intro, and the credits, and filling out all the information, and monitoring the comments over the course of several days.
Oh, man. I do a lot for you, don't I?
You really do, you really do. It's almost like it's someone else's show.
Well, it is the season of giving, isn't it?
It is. Thank you for your channel.
Yeah.
So, Ian, today we're continuing our character discussions of holiday-themed characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so today we are talking about...
Mrs. Claus.
Shit, this is going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Alright. Where do we want to start with talking about Mrs. Claus?
Okay, so when I brought this up last time, it was mostly because I kept thinking of Santa mythology, and then I just thought, like, what if Santa was a woman? Like, oh shit, Mrs. Claus. I kind of want to talk about, because I don't know. I feel like maybe you do, or we could just like do research and people will listen to us do research. Do you know where Santa Claus or Mrs. Claus first comes from?
No idea. No idea whatsoever. It just appears at one point.
Does it? Okay.
As far as I know, like I've never seen like a Mrs. Claus origin, or I don't know if there's like a first story that featured a Mrs. Claus. I've no idea.
I see anything that has to do with like a Santa origin, Mrs. Claus is never there.
I remember there was one of those claymation origins. They show him meeting Mrs. Claus.
Did they?
Yeah, but they don't, like, it's not the main focus or anything. He just, somewhere along the way, gets married, you know?
Okay, honestly, it's been so many years since I've seen any of those. So there's probably more to it also, but...
Those are just kind of burnt in my memory because
Yeah.
I watched, like, the ABC Family 25 Days of Christmas every year for a long time.
Mm,
And they
I
always
gotcha.
played the claymation specials. So those are, like, burnt into my memory. So I remember vague outlines about them, but I don't remember all the specific plot points and stuff like that.
I gotcha. So, okay. So, I think Mrs. Claus is another one of those weird holiday tropes. Not even necessarily tropes, but weird holiday affiliations like Jack Frost and Krampus, where we kind of know what we're talking about, but every time I see it, it's different.
Yeah, Mrs. Claus is really wildly characterized differently.
The first time I've ever seen Mrs. Claus dealt with as part of a necessary Santa mythos is, oddly enough, the Santa Claus 2.
That's what I was going to say, too. Like, that, I was sitting here as we started, I'm trying to think of roles Mrs. Claus has actually played in a story. And I think the Santa Claus 2 is the most in-depth Mrs. Claus has ever been to any kind of story of her own.
Okay, I'm going to give you another
one. I literally do not think she's ever been in another story.
I'm going to give you another one, because I think there's two. One of them is going to be a Santa Claus 2, which I actually rewatched earlier today, and I completely forgot we were doing this, so nice.
Oh, well, good on you.
But the other one is the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy Christmas special.
Oh, really?
Where they go to the North Pole so they can prove Santa's real. And when they get there, it turns out Santa's been turned into a vampire. And the twist, origin, backstory thing is Mrs. Claus is actually the queen of the vampires and Santa fell in love with her. But Santa's kind of an asshole who doesn't do anything the whole year. And Mrs. Claus is fed up with it, so she turned him into a vampire so she could take vacation.
Wow.
And it's kind of amazing.
That's kind of dark.
I love it. It's so funny. The guy that plays Santa is the guy that plays Iago in Aladdin.
Oh, interesting. Gilbert Godfrey.
Yep. Yep. So
that is like the most not Santa Claus voice I could possibly imagine.
Exactly, because the guy's kind of an asshole in it, but it's great. So like, that's the other one. That's the only other time where I've seen like this point of the story is that Mrs. Claus has an arc, and that one also comments covertly all over the place on like the whole sort of Mrs. Claus is there, but she's there just to say that Santa has a wife, and then all of the gender rolled baggage that gets affiliated with that pisses her off.
That's interesting because, like, yeah, you think Mrs. Claus, and she's never the focus of anything. Like the only thing I remember Mrs. Claus doing was in the Rudolph claymation special, because the claymation people didn't have the ability to make Santa Claus's body fat, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to put the clothing on him, and not have him look obese. So they had to make like Santa's torso and arms skinny, and when he's not in the full Santa garb for a scene. And so to explain that away, they have Mrs. Claus just throwing cookies and milk at him on the table. She's like, eat up! Your children aren't going to recognize you if you're a skinny Santa. And like that was the only like time I really remember her doing or saying anything in any of those specials, which is crazy. Yeah. And so it's weird that like Santa Claus 2 is the only one where we're getting, you know, a more traditional style Mrs. Claus. Like the Billy and Mandy thing is a subversion. Yeah. The Mrs. Claus in the Santa Claus 2 is at least somewhat, you know, more, like the Santa Claus that's untraditional, but it's molding toward a traditional Santa, right?
Yeah, and the Santa Claus 2 in particular does a lot with what is it about Santa that you absolutely need? Like, what is, without these things, is Santa still Santa in the way we know him? And the whole sort of impetus for that of being like, he loses his Santa powers if he doesn't get married after a certain point. Mm-hmm. The movie's not particularly good because they fall in love over the course and get married over the course of like 3 weeks.
What, that never happened to you?
No, I mean, all I'm gonna say is
this is why you're such a heartless bastard, Steve. You've never fallen in love and married someone in 3 weeks.
Flirt with me and then drive me away and make me live in the North Pole for the rest of my life, where I never see my friends and family again, and then you transform into a really, really fat guy. I'm not sure how much I'd want to do that, but not knocking anyone who does. So that movie's kind of awkward in that they get to know each other and fall in love in the span of like 3 weeks, even though they only have like 2 personal interactions with each other. Mm-hmm. But the grander idea that I don't think they play with enough that I really like is after he becomes Santa, there is a several year grace period in between movies where he should have gone out and found a Mrs. Claus. They just don't bring it up until that point because that's where the sequel happens. But like there's a span of like 5 to 10 years between movies. And that's kind of cool. Where like Santa is Santa, but after a certain point, there is a certain era of Santa, and then there's a certain era of Santa and Mrs. Claus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And also in the Santa Claus the movie, the live action one, I know she's kind of like with him when he dies, and so she gets to stay like with him in his second life kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I really did like about what that movie did is kind of like a, you know, you see this done with the Kents a lot as part of like Superman Origins, where for whatever reason they can't have children together.
Yeah.
Like, is it Morrison where he made it in action where he made like both of them completely infertile? Like, so it's like they might conceivably be able to with another person, but never together. I
think that was Morrison. I feel like that was something in All-Star.
No, I'm pretty sure that was action. If it was Morrison, that feels more like action than All-Star. But anyway, in the Santa Claus movie, you know, they show that Santa and his wife have never had children because they can't, but Chris still loves children, so that's why he was like, you know, that's why he'd go from house to house in the olden days and deliver toys, and then they get caught in a snowstorm together and perish, but Father Time comes and resurrects them, and they get like the home on the North Pole to deliver presents to children all over the world forever. And
That's
like,
kind of adorable.
yeah, and like I believe Father Time says something to the effect of, the world's children will be your children, which is really interesting notion. So I do like the idea that part of the Santa and Mrs. Claus mythos is they can't have kids of their own. I think that's a really fascinating notion.
Now that you mention that opens up two problems I have with the Santa Claus Tim Allen movies that only exist in the first one and the third one because the second one exists at all. Because in the third one, they have a kid. And then in the first one, after Tim Allen kills Santa, there's no mention of Mrs. Claus. Like, do the elves just, like, shove her out when Santa dies? Does she get to
my fucking god. What the shit? Oh, that's so fucked up!
Right?
Holy
Does
shit.
she just fade out of existence when he dies?
Holy shit!
Was that guy not Santa for enough decades to warrant a Mrs. Claus? Is that a thing?
I mean, he slipped off the roof. That's got to show some pretty crummy Santa Claus abilities, right?
That's fair. I mean, honestly, if all it takes to be Santa is to kill Santa, we might have a bit of a problem.
I'm trying to remember, didn't we, like, make a really dark pitch for the Santa Claus sequel with, like, a black Santa, and it just goes, like, really wrong because a black guy keeps breaking into people's houses? I think we did that at some point. I think we made, like, a pitch for a really dark sequel to the Santa Claus.
Just basically make it Get Out, except with the Santa Claus.
Yes, that.
But yeah, that's the weird thing, is that, like, Mrs. Claus's role shifts in all of these things, but then as long as if it's not contingent to who Santa is, she just seems to kind of fade out. Like the Billy and Mandy one, I partly like because in that one, Santa's kind of a doofus, and all he, like, literally the origin for Santa in that universe is he liked giving gifts to people, so he just walked up to random people and tried to give them gifts, and it was creepy as hell. And then at one point, he tries to give Mrs. Claus one, and she thinks it's endearing because he's an idiot. And then they work together to make Christmas happen.
That's awesome. Huh. All right, well, like, we've been doing this with the holiday characters because there's such an open book, it seems, you know? There's, like, I feel like the only holiday character that doesn't have the potential for more stories is probably Frosty the Snowman.
Yeah, that's because he's Frosty. At that point, he's kind of...
Yeah, like
he's defined.
He's a one-note character, but, you know, a lot of these other characters have kind of, you know, endless possibilities, but, you know, we just don't seem to do anything with them. So we've been doing pitches. So, Steve, what would, you know, some studio executive calls you up and say, hey, Steve Baxi, I've heard your reviews and stuff, and you seem like you've got a good head on your shoulders. Write me a Mrs. Claus story. It can be a movie, it can be a comic book, it can be an episode of a television show. What is your Mrs. Claus story, Steve?
So I'd want to make a Mrs. Claus movie where Mrs. Claus isn't just Santa's love interest, but actually gets roped into another basic classic celestial figure. So, like, Santa is quote-unquote the personification of Christmas. Mrs. Claus, I would, like, maybe bend into being, like, Mother Time or Mother Earth. She'd be Mother Earth. So Santa is a good person that is allowed to keep living and do what he does because Mrs. Claus is the personification of the Earth, and the Earth itself needs people like Santa who want to constantly give back to it and make it a better place to live in.
Okay, that's interesting.
I'd make it like this really, really grand epic romance between one person who is a god and another person that loves a god. Okay,
that could be really cool. I like that. That's a fun idea.
It could also be corny as hell, but I don't care.
Yeah, I get you. For me, I think I'd like to do something a little more basic than that. You're on that Grant Morrison level. I'm over here just like, oh, this would be a fun little thing. I would like to do kind of like a Rudolph situation where it's like, you know, the character that has to save Christmas, like have Santa get, I don't know, sick or whatever, Santa is taken out of commission, and it's up to Mrs. Claus to do the job. And so it's like a really feminist empowerment message of a woman can save Christmas too.
I kind of dig that.
Yeah, I just would like the idea of like Mrs. Claus sitting there is always giving Chris suggestions, but he always does stuff the old way because he's kind of a curmudgeon-y old man that's just set in his ways. And then like one time, for whatever reason, Santa Claus is taken out of commission on Christmas and he can't do it. And Mrs. Claus has to step in, and she does it and does it even better. Like, does it in half the time. Has enough time to go to Mars and help them out or something. I don't know.
I like that. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so, too. That'd be a cool Mrs. Claus story. What do you think of the idea that, like, Mrs. Claus just kind of chills at the workshop and, like, takes care of all the elves and stuff? Do you like that, or do you want her to just be doing something more in general? Not in her own story, but just in other like times that you see her.
I would like for her to do more, but I also think it's kind of nice that she's the one like nurturing the elves and like in charge of the more operational part of Santa preparing for a Christmas trip every year. Mm-hmm. So do you remember, what is it called? Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas? Did you ever watch that?
I don't think so.
So it's basically a series of vignettes starring different, like, Disney-based characters that just do things on Christmas. Twice Upon a Christmas is pretty bad because it doesn't make any sense it's just stupid. There's this story where the opening one is where Minnie and Daisy are both in a skating competition, and they introduce Minnie first, and Daisy thinks it's her who's going first, and then suddenly gets really angry and vindictive and fights her over just because she didn't remember the order. And it's the stupidest thing. But the other story that has to do with Santa is Huey, Dewey, and Louie sneaking into Santa's workshop to make sure they're on the nice list. And in that one, Mrs. Claus is a disembodied voice that's in all of the intercoms and is basically just running the whole facility. And I kind of like that about it. I like Mrs. Claus being like a really active role in what makes Christmas work outside of that one day a year. And it seems like for the most part, that's usually what she's doing. Aside from the cases here and there where like Christmas is a lot more like mysterious and magical, it all seems to just happen at once. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the Santa Claus movies in general.
Yeah, I gotcha. Huh. You know, while you're talking, I thought back to my pitch, and I just want to adjust it real quick. I wanted the Mrs. Claus thing to be a video game.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
That'd be the plot for a video game. Yeah, what Mrs. Claus is doing, I think, matters, because, like you said, she just kind of seems to be there mostly so we can have the kind of normal, like, you know, traditional relationship, you know, husband-wife thing going on with Santa. And I don't know, like, yeah, I agree, it's kind of nice that someone's taking care of the elves, because otherwise the elves are always on that weird level of, are they slaves?
Yeah.
But what is she doing other than that, though? Like, I don't know what I would really want her to be up to.
Well, see, and that's the female agency thing of this, of like, does Mrs. Claus love Santa and therefore give up who she is to be part of what he's doing constantly, or does she have a personal part in this too, in which case it's actually a partnership?
Yeah. And that's the point where I'm like,
That's kind of the annoying thing about both the Santa Claus 2 and Elf, where... And Elf doesn't have anything to do with Mrs. Claus, but the woman that Will Ferrell falls in love with just gives up her life and starts living in the North Pole with him at the end.
Yeah.
The exact same way Mrs. Claus does in the Santa Claus 2, and that's kind of annoying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because wasn't she a teacher in Santa Claus 2?
She was a principal of a school.
Oh, okay. Huh.
And she had, like, a pretty interesting, tragic backstory and all that stuff, and it made a lot of sense for her to be a principal of a school and shit. And, like, she had dementia, and then she just became Mrs. Claus.
And then she just gave up and became Mrs. Claus. It's, like, particularly weird in the Santa Claus continuity, because they look normal when it's not Christmas, and they can go places. But I guess she just decided not to care. Yeah, like that's the thing is like you need her to be there for her own interests and not just for like the traditional give up on your dreams kind of thing.
And this is kind of why
can you do a story with Mrs. Claus where she feels unfulfilled in their relationship, but you don't make Santa the bad guy for it. You just like Mrs. Claus has to find a purpose of her own. Could that be a thing?
I dig that. Mrs. Claus and Santa get a divorce.
Well, I wouldn't even necessarily want him to get a divorce because I don't need to make Santa like a bad guy for this to work. Sure. I legit think you can just have Santa just thoughtless is the wrong word. Blind. You can have Santa just blind to the idea that she's not happy because you can have him just in the headspace of it's the North Pole, everyone's happy. Yeah. And to have Miss Claus feel like she's unfulfilled in that could be an interesting thing to do with her as a character.
And then particularly even setting in some of like the eternal agelessness of this. Like they've been doing this for hundreds of years and at some point there's a midlife crisis behind it.
Yeah, that could be the existential Christmas movie.
But see, this is part of why I ask where Mrs. Claus first came from or is mentioned, because I wonder how much of her inception is motivated by really American Coca-Cola-esque interest of like Santa drinking Coke and being the Santa he is serves a particular purpose for that company. Is like Santa having a Mrs. Claus another one of those things like we don't want Santa running around in the North Pole with a bunch of elves. Mm-hmm. Like he has to have a wife, like something like that. Is it one of those things where like it's a very particularly motivated statement about Santa being a straight white guy?
Yeah. I'm just.
I don't think it has to be, but maybe that's where it came from, and if it is, that'd be worth talking about.
Mm-hmm. Looks like I'm just looking through it, the Wikipedia page, and it looks like the first time she came up was in a story called A Christmas Legend in 1849.
Damn, that's pretty old.
Yeah, so she's been around for a minute. Sorry, what?
That's older than A Christmas Carol, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I really don't know what to make of what to do about Mrs. Claus because I agree. I don't like the idea that she's just kind of like. Here's the thing: factually, she is just kind of stuck in the era where we don't think about women as anything else than accessories to a man.
Yes,
that's just factually what she is. But I think she could be more. It's again with these Christmas characters. There's so much room for new stuff to be done.
And particularly when we talk about the fact that there isn't a definitive version being written. So like we talked about how different is Jack Frost from the Snow Queen, how different is Mrs. Claus from the Snow Queen?
Mm-hmm. Could you make Mrs. Claus the Snow Queen?
Exactly where I was going with that, yeah.
Yeah, like you could do the reformed villain thing. You could have like Miss Claus be some kind of magical villainess at the North Pole, and then Santa comes along, and through the sheer goodness of his heart, he wins her over, makes her fall in love with him, and that, like, melts her icy heart, and she wants to spend the rest of her life with him, doing what makes him happy, and because it's helping to make her happy, helping to make the world a better place. That could work. That could give her motivation. To just be at the North Pole and helping with the Christmas mission.
Yeah, I like that. Talking about Mrs. Claus is partly difficult because there's so little material to go off of and like even suggest, but I like how much room she opens up for Santa. Like I feel like the myth gets expanded and feels a lot more full and life and lively because Santa has someone else in his life that he can talk to that isn't just an elf.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because like you get the feeling that like the elves are always wildly different in portrayal. I really like the elves in Rise of the Guardians where they're just like hopelessly stupid.
Yeah.
They're just constantly getting themselves in trouble and shit, and they're just you could never have a conversation with one. So, like, I like that portrayal. Whereas, like, sometimes they're just little dudes, and that's like, well, you kind of just, I don't know, there's, at that point, you almost don't need a Mrs. Claus. You don't need a person for Santa to be with. Oh my god, creepy Mrs. Claus origin. You ready?
Okay.
Santa is alone for 100 years with no one but the elves, which he has trouble relating with. Then Santa starts to get really sad, and the elves ask him why he's sad, and he tells them that he never had a wife. And then the elves build him a wife.
Oh my god, that's twisted. I love it. I love it.
And it's dark and terrifying.
Okay. Let's invert that a little bit. And let's write a fan fiction about Futurama's evil Santa that exists because the real Santa died long ago, and he was commissioned to be built by Mrs. Claus, who was old and lonely.
Oh, man. I like it. I like it a lot. Yay, destroying childhood dreams with creepiness.
With just weird insanity.
Yeah, that's the best.
I also don't think Mrs. Claus has a signature look the way Santa does. I feel like doing that would be kind of cool. Like, maybe she has green and white as her colors as opposed to red and white.
Yeah, that was something I noticed while I was looking for images for the thumbnail. By the way, everyone, you're welcome for the sexy Mrs. Claus. I was looking for different images of Mrs. Claus, and, like, you usually just get, like, older lady, white hair, some kind of red and white. Sometimes it's a dress. Sometimes it just looks like a gown. It's not very consistent design. At least nowhere near as consistent as Coke Santa.
Yeah,
that could be good. I don't know. I am certainly partial to sexy Mrs. Claus because it's fun. Candy cane stockings and all, bro.
And Mrs. Claus is really valuable. I feel like you can do a lot. She doesn't have to be old like Santa. I don't even think Santa has to be old. Like, does he?
I don't know. Like, it depends when we're talking old. Like,
well, because here's the other thing. Like, and I'm still going to pull out the Santa Claus partly because I think that's as not great as those movies are. They do have the most coherent and complicated and convoluted Santa mythos that I can think of. Yeah. Tim Allen looks old and is made to look old because he's Santa. In actuality, he's not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in that movie, the dude's probably in his early 40s tops, but he looks like he's 100 years old.
Yeah, I agree. So you could maybe do something with that where, like, as it gets closer to the season, the more they look like the popular versions of them in people's heads. I don't know. I want Grant Morrison to do another Klaus and introduce Mrs. Claus, because we got freaking beefy ass jacked Santa Claus in Klaus, and I could really go for whatever his immortal wife ends up being.
Literally, he just crosses over with Gail Simone's Red Sonoja, and she becomes Mrs. Claus.
Yes, I am fine with this. Oh, man.
She already has red hair. It's perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Is there anything else we want to talk about with Miss Claus?
Not particularly. I kind of hope over time she becomes as important to Christmas as Santa himself does. I feel like Mrs. Claus imagery would just be cool to have.
Yeah, or, just Santa needs to start going out with Mrs. Claus for Christmas. They need to be a team. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Need to see more stuff where she's in the sleigh too, and she, like, throws the presents down the chimney once he's in the house. That'd be
fun.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, and again, just more coordination with how the actual North Pole operation is run and how Santa and Mrs. Claus will work together on that. What the fuck is Mrs. Claus's first name? Can someone agree on that?
What, we don't have a first name for Mrs. Claus? Like,
do we?
Okay, so I'm looking at the Wikipedia article. Apparently in the UK, she's known as Rebecca.
That's so fucking random.
It's very
Why is she
specific.
Rebecca?
She has also been referred to as Mary, Jessica, Lila, and Martha!
Because in the Santa Claus 2, she's Carol. And every time I see that name, I just think of the memes of like, okay, look, Carol.
Carol's a clever name for Miss Claus, though, because you got the pun to work with there for holiday.
But, like, can we just agree? Like, Saint Nick, Santa Claus, Mrs. Something Claus, can we have a name?
Mrs. Rebecca Claus.
I hate that. Who the fuck thought Rebecca Claus was a good idea?
It's the British, Steve. They're awful. The entire fucking island.
How dare they? How dare they?
They just take the joy out of everything because they're British. That's what they do.
Do you think Superman and Batman bond during Christmas a lot?
You know, it's funny. I picked a Batman Noel motion comic for a review that's coming up later this week, and I'd never read that story before.
Oh my god, it's one of the best Batman stories ever.
Yeah, and it's just there's the Batman Superman moment in that. I'm like, oh my god, yay, Batman Superman Christmas.
Yeah, no, I fucking love Superman in that story. It's so good. But yeah. That's gonna be exciting. I don't know. Oh, okay. I'm scrolling down this Wikipedia article. Apparently, the British actually had an entire marketing campaign centered on Mrs. Claus.
Oh,
didn't catch on though.
Well.
So
what can you do? Yep. The British are no Coca-Cola. Well, I could have told you that, Steve.
They probably drink Pepsi, the bastards.
Yeah. You know, I watched. For a time I was following Alex Day, the vlogger, and anytime he'd come to America, he'd buy vanilla Coke because you couldn't get it over there. And he'd be like, "You Americans are so fucking lucky," and he'd just chug the whole can down.
Vanilla Coke is gross. I don't know what he's talking about.
What the fuck? We are no longer friends.
Vanilla Coke is like the worst thing to happen to Coke.
No. What is wrong with you?
Apparently I have taste.
Apparently you have the taste of shit in your mouth if you don't like vanilla Coke. The hell?
If I have the taste of shit in my mouth, it's because I drank vanilla Coke once.
Oh god. Friendship over. Geeky gentleman canceled. God damn, I hate this guy. Oh.
Who the hell thought vanilla Coke was a good idea?
Me, because it's delicious.
No, it's not. What's wrong with you?
What is wrong with you? This is why no one likes you, Steve.
I just hate vanilla Coke. It's the dumbest thing to ever happen.
Well, they're actually going to tell me cherry Coke is bad.
No.
God.
No. Anyway.
I'm never going to be able to look at you the same.
I feel like you need to add vanilla Coke to the thumbnail of this.
I might have to now. Oh well. All right, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Let's see here. What's next week? Yeah, we'll have one more of these. Who are we going to talk about? The Grinch. Let's do The Grinch.
That's exciting.
Yep. All right, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the Exile.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things like the amazing taste of vanilla Coke and Steve Baxey's wrongness about everything. Steve is always wrong.
Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas!